Thank you so much for coming back to Sarita Talks. I have an awesome guest. His name is Tito Guerrero. I just want to, kind of let everybody know that when we talk about different things, there's always something you can pick out. There's always something you could learn. And I was talking to Tito before we got started, and he was telling me a little bit about his family and how he grew up. So I want to turn it over to you, Tito, and you can kind of tell me about the journey that your father had taken and maybe lead up to where you're at today. It's all you, Tito. I'll just jump in every once in a while and pick your brain.
Yeah, no, definitely. My dad was an immigrant, came up from South America, from Peru. Literally the American dream. He wanted to come up here and try to make something of himself so he could give back to his family, which he did. He came up, he worked multiple jobs like most immigrants do, and eventually settled into mechanic and machinist. And in that, he wanted to open up his own business. He eventually rented out a corner of a shop, called it, his nickname is Tito. It's my real name, not his real name, but he started Tito's Machine Shop. And it was just like this little corner of someone else's shop, but that was his dream. And then eventually he rented out half of a warehouse and then actually bought the entire warehouse off of the owner over the years, and bought real estate. I mean, literally American dream. Like, his story is the American dream. And so I grew up in that environment, and I really hated him as a young child, because at the age of 8, he put me to work in that machine shop, clocking in and out with all the adults. And I made a whole whopping 50 cents an hour, long time ago. And he basically told my mom I was a very spoiled kid up until that moment. And he told my mom, if he wants anything, he can work for it. And so everything that I wanted, I had to work for, which, once again, I hated him as a kid. Later on, I was like so thankful that he instilled that work ethic and understanding the value of a dollar and everything else. But I grew up in that. My parents, literally, I just was on vacation with them last weekend. Still together, nice. 56 years, I think now.
That's a blessing.
Yeah, been together forever, right? So literally, I had no reason to go down any kind of a bad path, but I did. And going through high school and everything, out of high school, hanging out with some of the wrong people. And, I was the square who always had a job, but, like to hang out with the people who didn't work and did drugs and all the other fun stuff.
I just love the way you did that. The square, and
now
we just kind of wish, in hindsight, we just stuck with the square. I know.
I was the L7 for sure. And, and out of everyone in the group, I was the one person who wasn't supposed to get in trouble or anything. Needless to say, and I'll try and make a long story short, but
take your time.
I was working at UPS. I was, straight out of high school. I was 19 and I slipped 2 discs in my back, and I was independent. I had my own place. And I didn't want to go back to mom and dad. So like bills started piling up, and I reached out to one of my friends in that life and was like, hey, I need to make money. And he's all, that ain't you. And I'm like, man, I don't care. Like, I can't work, and I'm not going back with my parents. And so he gave me some cocaine to sell, which I did for all of a week and a half, and was really scared because people called all day and night for it. And I was like, no, I'm that's scary. These guys are like really fiends, and I can't deal with it. So then he gave me some weed to sell. Now it's legal in California. Back then it wasn't. But so I started doing that, and I worked my way up to, the good stuff, from the Mexican dirt weed to the Indo weed. And, now you got all different kinds, but back then those were the two, right? And I caught the eye of some of the bigger drug dealers in the area, and I got set up for a home invasion robbery. If I turned around, you'd see a scar on the back of my head from where the bullet went off the back of my head. They had us laid out, robbed us and everything. Yeah. And at the time I was actually trying to stop. So I kind of moved my business to another guy across the street and was like, I will will it over to you because I'm going to go back to work and everything. And just bad timing. And so that sent me off kind of a deep end, because the bullet went off my head into my best friend's mouth, took out 2 teeth, cut his tongue in half, took out another tooth, and stopped over here. And I'll never forget, the gun went off, and it was like in a movie. Everything was black, and I just assumed I was dead. I couldn't hear it because the gun went off in my ear. And when I opened my eyes and like I could see the guy's feet, and they were, when I looked up, they kind of looked at each other like I don't think they meant to do it, and they ran out the door. And I was just like, and I reached back and I could feel the blood on my head, and I was like, okay, but I'm okay. And when I turned around, my friend was laying there shaking like in a movie with a big old puddle of blood around his head. And so I just assumed he was dead. And like I'm just stuck watching. And then he sits up, puts his finger through the hole in his mouth, and I could see his finger coming out inside of his mouth. And then he's like, that didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. And I'm like, oh my God, like, what are you talking about?
That
And then
is
he's
like
all,
Pulp Fiction. That is
but
crazy.
he was in shock. He was in shock. And then
Yeah.
he goes, oh man, pick up my teeth. And so like we're picking up his teeth. And then I'm like,
Oh,
dude, like, no, we got to call 911. And so needless to say, all this stuff goes on. Obviously, I don't live there anymore. We move out, and I got back into school. I was actually doing good. I got into UC Berkeley. And right when I get in, I started late, and moving back to Berkeley where all this stuff had happened, I just started hanging around people again. And next thing I know, I'm not cutting it in school. And my dad gave me an out, and I tell him, I go, I love you to death because I know you're trying to help, but that was probably the worst thing you could have did. Like you should have just let
how
me
older were
stay.
you? How
I
old were you?
was 22.
Okay. And what was
And
the out?
the out was, I need you to come help me at the shop.
Oh,
And so drop out of school, right? And I
yeah.
go back to work and never went back to school again, not till much, much later. But I go and I start working at the shop, and I'm literally living in one of his duplexes, which is right around the corner from that shop, which is West Side Berkeley, which is, not the best of areas. And so I'm right back in that environment, right? And so I'm working 6 days a week, but I'm partying every night. I'm going out drinking. I didn't do drugs or anything, but I'm just drinking and hanging out with all those guys again. And eventually, about 2 years later, it all caught up one night. I had a roommate who was a dealer, but our pact was, you don't do any of that stuff in the house. Like, you don't
Right.
bring it home, right? He did.
Mm-hmm.
He got in a shootout in my house over a bad deal.
So this is two
So
shootouts in places where you've lived. And you've been
yes,
shot once. Your best friend's been shot. So now we're in
yeah.
the second shootout. How old are you
I'm
now?
I'm 24, and
You're
I'm
24. Now,
actually,
let me tell you, I
yeah.
am a believer, and God saved you so many times. You had better be doing good now, but go
Man,
ahead.
so yeah, 24. And I'll never forget, I was at work, and my roommate's brother-in-law, he comes running around the corner just dripping with sweat, and he's like, I think Ralph's dead. I think they shot him. I gotta go. And he just takes off, and I'm like, what the hell? So my house is literally around the corner. So I walk around and I see bullet holes in the window, and I'm just like, oh my goodness. When I get up there, my roommate's up there, gun out, and he's like trying to pick up shell cases. I'm like, what the hell? And he's like, someone tried to rob me. And later I find out they had a deal, and they tried to rob him in the deal.
Yeah,
So I told him, I was like, you gotta go, bro. Like, that's not okay. You got to go.
right, right.
So fast forward a few weeks later, when he's actually supposed to move out, like my brother, my best friend, younger guy, Yahim, I used to take care of him as a kid. He was about to graduate high school, but he would come over and hang out all the time too. So horrible me, I got him in this environment, right?
Yeah.
But he comes by the shop, and he's like, hey, can me and my friends hang out? And I'm like, yeah, go ahead. He's all, man, why don't you come? I'm like, no, we work late tonight. Like, go hang out, right? So he
Mm-hmm.
goes over to my house. He had a key and everything. My dad, he's like, well, you got those stupid kids over at your house. And I'm like, yeah, it's like my little brother, man. Don't worry. And then he's like,
Right,
why don't you
right.
go home and hang out with them, then? Right? All these
Mm-hmm.
weird things just happened. Like, my dad never lets
Yeah.
me leave, right? But he's like, go. If he had made me stay, I probably wouldn't be talking to you, because I probably wouldn't have been in prison. I don't know. But
Okay.
I go home, and mind you, my mindset is, these dudes had a shootout. They're still out there somewhere, right? Like,
Oh
I don't know
yeah,
if they're coming
yeah.
back, right?
And
My
the
roommate,
roommate had just moved out.
well, he's in the process. So he's there with his
Oh,
stuff packed, like taking stuff out.
yeah.
And so I get over there, my buddy and his friends, they're all drinking and stuff. And so I'm like, I go get one of my guns. I'm like, I need to be protected just in case, right? So it
Right.
gets to a point where everyone's been drinking, and I'm like sitting on my porch, and he comes out and he's like, "Hey, well, why are you out here?" And I'm like, "I'm tripping, like I don't
Yeah.
like it. You guys keep coming in and out. The door is wide open. Like those guys could come back. Like," and he's like, "Why don't we just go inside then?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah, right."
Okay.
So
Yeah.
so he's walking in the door. I'm walking in behind him. It's back in the day, baggy clothes and everything. So I can't really
Mhm.
walk around without the gun falling out. So I'm taking the gun out to go put it up in the cabinet. He's walking in, music's blaring. I'm taking the gun out. He says something, and I go, "What?" And he turns around. I still to this day, I have no idea what he said, but he turns around and says it again. And when I go, "What?" Boom, gun goes off,
Bullet.
back of the head, and he died. Um,
Mm.
so when the gun goes off, I drop it because I wasn't expecting it to.
Mhm.
I see him fall, and so I just run over and I grab him, and I got my finger on the hole and telling him to breathe. Like a cop just happened to be coming around the corner, so the cop comes in, and I'm like, "I did it." Look around, like there's a gun, like it was me. Like just
Yeah.
get an ambulance, right? So they get the ambulance. First, it was like, "Hey, we know it was an accident and everything," and then two detectives come in. "Oh, you were fighting. Oh, you were mad at him." I was like, "No,
Oh,
no, we
no.
were drinking, we were partying, whatever." Nope.
Mhm.
And I get charged with murder. 2 years later, after being in county jail for 2 years, I get convicted of second-degree murder. 5 years into my sentence, it gets overturned, and I end up going back out to court, back to county, which was not fun after being in prison
Oh,
for
no,
a couple
no.
of years.
Now tell
Uh,
me, because
yeah,
I know about the degrees. When you were sitting on murder, was it first or second?
it was first. That was my
First.
original
Okay.
charge was a 187. Once trial started, they threw out first degree and put in second degree, and then they had
Okay.
involuntary manslaughter in there. But
Okay.
my it got overturned because they didn't have both involuntary manslaughters. They only had one. So it got
Mhm.
overturned because the court basically said I could have been found guilty of negligence, but it wasn't offered to the jury.
No, they
So
only had the one or the other.
right. So it was
Yeah.
like either second degree murder or it was a straight accident, and they didn't see an accident. They were like it was an avoidable accident, right?
Mhm.
So I go back to court, and yeah, they ended up saying like we'll give you a plea agreement for the negligent involuntary manslaughter. They didn't convict me of a gun enhancement when I got convicted of murder though.
Mhm.
So they reinstated the gun enhancement because that was the only way they could keep me in prison. Otherwise, it was a 4 years and I was already 5 years in. So they gave me
Okay.
10 years for the gun. So basically, I just went back to do the gun enhancement, and I ended up taking a plea agreement for 14 years and did 12 before
You
I
did
got
12
out.
years altogether. Now let me tell you let me ask you, when you were first sentenced for that, was it second degree murder? How much time
Mhm.
were you sentenced to before they overturned it?
I got 15 to life, and I
Okay.
will never forget. I tell this story a lot. I mean, they hadn't given me the time, but I knew second degree murder carries 15 to
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
So when they said I was guilty, they walked me up the stairs, and there was a little Asian homie that was in a holding tank. So when I walked up, he's like, "Hey, what's up, bro?
What
What,
happened?
what what'd you get?" And
Yeah.
I'm like, "Man, 15 to life, second degree murder." And he's like, "Man, that's nothing." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's something, bro. Like, what do you?" He's like, "Man, it's nothing, man. They got me on like 20 of those. Don't trip." And I'm like,
Oh,
"What?" So we keep walking, and I asked the deputy, I'm like, "What is he like gone or what?" And he's like, "No, he's been convicted of like 5 different murders, and he went state to state killing people. So he's doing a trial here, and then we're extraditing him to like 5 other states." And I'm like, "No way." He's like, "Yeah, he's probably going to get the death penalty eventually." And I was like, "You know what?
I
I
guess
mean,
it's not that bad.
literally, it's not that. That's
I
exactly. I
guess it's
was
not
like, you
that
know
bad.
what? It took all that anxiety. Like I feel for dude and all of his victims, but I'm
Mhm.
like, I needed to hear that because
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
head was like gone.
Well,
But yeah,
Let me just attest to how real this really is right here with Tito, because I was in Jackson County Detention Center for 2.5 years fighting my case. I started off on first degree murder, which means premeditated, which means we're going to sweat you out, which
Yep.
means we're going to try and get you to take a plea as soon as we're ready. So I've been there almost 3 years. My plea, the first plea comes, the Alford plea, anywhere in between for second degree murder from 10 to 22. Now, mind you, I'm in Jackson County Detention Center in the heart of Kansas City. So I'm, basically, and I tell people, my whole pod was bangers and thugs. Like we would play, for real, we would play a game of spades. And I remember sitting there thinking, it's $2.5 million to get these three people and myself out of prison. My bond was $250,000 cash only. Yeah, so $1 million bond, none of that. You're not leaving. You're on the first thing smoking to the penitentiary, most likely. So, a couple people that had went before me, they were getting 25-year sentences. So when my sentence came back and it was 17 years, all the people that were like, "Oh my gosh, why aren't you devastated?" And I'm like, you don't remember old girl and her. Like, I know this. I'm good for, I've been here 3 years. They say prison's a lot nicer. When you're in situations like that, you've got to cling to whatever can, get you through sometimes the next minute. And listen, and as you know, you're like, well, this guy's got it. I saw some things. I know I was in there with a couple because there were men housed on other floors, and they ended up getting, I think, 4 life sentences for a series of crimes. So life sentences are nothing in a California or a big city in Missouri. So to have that opportunity, I mean, you've got to have done some changing when you got there and realized it was, that, hey, I'm going to be here, but I got to do something with it.
Yeah, no,
True?
and I ironically, and I tell people this a lot because everyone's like, what was this big time when you just changed? And I'm like, one, I'm the same person. Tito is still Tito. Like
Yep.
I was a nice person, generous person. I believed in helping people even when I was doing stupid stuff, right? My choices, the people I hang around, that's what really changed. But ironically, when I got my life sentence overturned, I was bad. I was drinking all the time. Like I was,
What?
yes,
Bruno?
I am like, I could get some people on the call right now and they'd be like, man, he
Wow. Okay.
And we had it, fortunately and unfortunately, we had it really good in the building I was in for years where we ran the building. It was lightweight, like Goodfellas, like the guards they would tell us like, hey, we got a problem with 227. They don't shut their door on time. All right, we'll deal with that. Leave the cells alone to make wine. That's what we do. And we would be in there drinking every day, smoking cigars until they took tobacco. And they would tell us like when the sergeant or when the yard cops were coming in so we could clean everything up and put everything away. Yeah, no, we ran the building. It was crazy. But yeah, I was in that mindset of like, this is home and I go to work, I do what I got to do, but I'm gonna kick back afterwards. And it was that same mindset of just like, hey, get it where you can. And I jokingly tell people, I got a pretty good mouthpiece. So I was one of the first people in California caught with a cell phone. Now everyone and their mom has one. But back then, 2004, people did not have cell phones in prison. They just didn't.
So you were finessing. That's what we call it. You finessed kids getting a cell phone.
Yeah, and back then it was considered escape paraphernalia. So you went to the hole, and yeah, it was like threat of death. That they want to know who brought it in. And the worst thing they ever did was they let me out of the hole and did not transfer me. Every cop and free staff that wanted to make money came straight to me because they were like, you didn't tell. Everyone else told. And I sat in there for 6 months during the summer, which in Vacaville, California is not cool because there's no air conditioning. And when I got out, maybe within a month, I had staff that I had never talked to in my life. And they were like, hey, what's up, G? You all right? And I'm like, yeah. Like, you need anything, let me know. And I'm like, wait, what? And yeah, it was like,
And listen, and for the population, or not the population, but the people that watch the show and they don't know anything about prison, sometimes the people that work the prison, well, for the most part, they don't have the best intentions. They don't. Usually it's in a rural area. There's not a
mm,
lot of prosperity. There's not a lot of opportunity. I was in a women's prison in a rural area. There was a lot of people I feel like who got the job just to be a sadist, to try and, beat on a woman or mistreat her.
mhm,
Um, a lot of times, they're like, oh my God, these prisoners, they're getting drugs in. They've taken mail, they've taken everything. So a big issue is this. You've got to watch the people that are coming in and out. Okay. Because you can't expect, here's another thing. Tito, you came out on the other side. You didn't
yeah.
get hooked on drugs in there and come out and become,
Mm.
a drug dealer and reoffend and all that. But the people that are supposed to be maintaining or controlling these facilities, we just heard a little tidbit. Now
Oh,
continue. Tell us what happens
yeah.
next.
No, yeah. So I mean, like I said, I was into all this stuff when I went to the hole for the cell phone. Along with the cell phone, I had DVD player, tons of DVDs, a
Wow.
Game Boy, a iPod. Like I had all this stuff, right? And
You had
mind you,
it all.
this is before camera phones, right? So this was an
Yeah.
old school. I will never forget when I got the phone in the cell the first day. I called my sister, right? And she didn't answer because it was a number she didn't know. And I'm like, hey, sis, it's
Right.
me. Call me back. All right, I gotta turn this off and hide it. And so later on that night, I pull it out. And when I turn it on, it starts vibrating and it says text message. I didn't know what a text message was.
Oh,
That didn't exist, right?
yeah.
So I'm like, and I'm asking my celly, and he's like, dude, I've been in longer than you. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, we'll
See.
figure it out, right? So then my sister
Yeah.
calls and I'm like, hey, and she's like, did you get my text message? And I'm like, yeah, what is that? How do I see it? And she's like, oh my God. And I'm like, hello, I've been locked up for a while, right? So she walked me through and like I got good to where like I could text, and that was the old school where you got to hit the number 3 times to get the letter.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah, I could text you a full conversation without looking at the phone and not misspell anything. Like I was good because I'd be sitting there watching my door and texting away. Needless to say, so I go the whole. I had like probably 7 gallons of wine to so they had all this stuff in their
Wow.
report, but they're like, they can only give you the write up for one thing. So of course it's a cell phone, right? But they
Right,
made a
right.
whole thing about you had a whole freaking bar and a movie theater and everything in your cell, and I'm like, yeah, I mean, okay. But
Right,
anyway,
right.
so when I get out, I was in the hole long enough that my points dropped down. So now I go to dorm living, which I was like, oh my God, it's like the worst punishment is dorm living, not like I wanted to be in a cell.
Yeah.
But I
Uh-huh.
get over there and all of the things I used to say I couldn't do, like I I didn't do schoolwork because it's too much
Mhm.
stuff going on. Even though I was in a cell, which is a perfect place to study because it's just you and your celly, right?
Uh-huh.
So all
Yeah.
these excuses I had on the level 3 side, I get to level 2 side and like people are doing big things. People are getting degrees. They're getting vocation
Mm.
and doing these prison industry authority PIA jobs and all this stuff. And I'm like, I've been listening to everyone about don't go be a slave and work a PIA job. Don't do this because they're gonna work you to death. And I'm like, but these dudes are happy. Like they're going to
Yeah.
a real job. So I'm like, you know what? I just need to
So
change,
break
right?
that down. Is that like a
Yeah.
work release program? Okay. So you're
No,
going
no,
out in the
no.
community and you're, or
No. This is in the prison. It's just what it is they have these jobs that basically are like a bridge. You do them in prison, but they have an effect outside. So I ended up
okay.
working in Lens Lab, which is an optical lab. Was
Nice.
until I was in there for a while that I found out like all the Medi-Cal frames, like for the state of California, literally we did them in prison. Like we did them all.
Mm.
We had a specialties lab. So like people that have the craziest glasses, we could generate them there. We had the most
Yeah.
certified opticians working in a lab in the country, and it was a prison. It was all inmates. It's just crazy,
Nice.
right? But it felt good because I got certified as an optician. I got certified as a contact lens examiner. I did the quality inspections. Like I literally have pictures of me because we had phones up in there too. But I have pictures of me like at my lensometer, like working and stuff. And I was like, oh my God, like I like my first 7, 8 years, I turned my nose up and I could have been so much further ahead, right? So then I was like, I need to
Mm,
get back in school. So I got back in school. And then like really the last 3.5 years, like I mean, everything went into and mind you, when I got out of the hole, I think I drank once afterwards and I had a sloppy bad experience. And so I was like, I'm not doing that no more. I just totally
right,
was like, I
right.
need to stop all that, right? But yeah, I just totally doubled down on like every self-help group. I don't care if it was Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, like I was just signing up. Like if you're
That's
talking
right.
positive, I'm there, right? And everyone would be
Yeah,
like, "Oh,
because
so are you changing your religion?" I'm like, "I don't have religion. I have faith that I'm going to get out and I need to be prepared." So, I'm here.
you know what I like to tell people all the time. If you don't have a plan, then you're planning to fail. And I
Mhm.
had a long time ahead of me. I'd already been there like 8 years. And I remember 6 years, I started seeing the light. I started seeing the light. I started knowing, hey, it's getting close. And I remember being put out of the resource library because, clearly I had a big mouth and a lot of people knew me and they're like, Tosin, your time is not here. It is not your time. And I'm like, but I want to start writing these places so they'll know me. And the lady who still works there
Right.
today said, they're going to know who you are. Don't worry about it. Regardless, though, people just don't realize when you warehouse somebody and you give them a decade until it's time to go home, we really can't focus on the prize until, you're 3, 4 years in sight, because the rest of that time, that's where you are and that's where you have to survive. And unless the law
Yes.
changes, you're going to be like Tito, drinking and trying to get a cell phone, because what else do you have to do? All right,
Yeah.
now pick up where I left off.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point, and it's funny because my old celly he said, "Man, I'm gonna tell you two numbers," and he's younger than me, right? But he had been
Mhm.
down longer, and I was like, "All right." He goes 5 and 7. I was like, "Okay, what's that?" He goes 5 years. It's gonna feel like you just showed up, like you're gonna get stressed out, all this other stuff, and I was like, "All right, okay, what's 7?" He goes 7 years. You're gonna start to make a decision. Do I want to just listen and be with all the negative stuff? Or do I want to like change up and you're gonna pick a course? And I'm like,
Out of the mouths of
whatever.
babes.
Right. And sure enough, 5 years is when I came back from court. So it did. It felt fresh. I was like, oh my God, now I got a date.
Mhm.
Am I gonna get out? Like, I don't know what's gonna happen, right? And then
Right, right.
7 years is when I got out the hole and I started just going, man, I need to work on something like this. This ain't. I can't do this until I get out, right? So,
Right, right.
I will say
Or else
I
I'm gonna
kept.
be right back.
Yeah, no, and it's crazy because you're absolutely right. Like you get in that mindset of like that if you're a lifer is a potential date. It's not even you don't even know if
Mhm.
you're going to get out, right? And then
Yep.
even if you have a date, if it's so far out, you're like, man, a riot could jump off. Like I could someone that I pissed off 30 years ago might show up and want to get
Yeah.
me. Like you don't know what could potentially happen because what I always tell people, I'm like, I'm very lucky that 12 years I wasn't on the yard when a big race riot jumped off or something, and I just happened to be
Mhm.
standing in the wrong spot. Like, there's so many
Yeah.
things that I wasn't a part of that I just luck, right? And on the flip side, there's a lot of times I knew something was going to happen, and so I purposely like, hey, I'm staying. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
going out.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
that's not
Uh-huh.
my fight, right? Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, no, it I just started doing as much self-help as I could. I got back into school, was doing good grades in school. I was still hustling. I pretty much stayed with phones until I got out, but I always kept them somewhere else. And it's funny because
Yeah.
the one phone I actually got caught with, I only got caught with two where I got the
Mhm.
write-ups and I got them in a folder right over there. But, um
Memories like the
yes, no,
colors of my mind.
I keep so in California it's called a central file, right? So I have my own personal
Mhm.
C file that I will not. My wife's like, why don't you get rid of that? I'm like, nope. I will.
Yeah.
You can put that in my casket for real.
Don't forget
That's
where you came from,
yeah.
you know?
But the second phone, I'll never forget. I had my bunkie was a lifer, and so they're in. Someone dropped a kite. Someone gave information that I had a phone, so they come rushing
Mhm.
in, and I just took the phone out. So I'm like, oh my god! And I had an agreement with these two white guys that were in front of me who didn't have any money. So I always gave them food and stuff. And I was like, if they come, you guys are taking this phone. They're like, oh yeah, no problem. And I'm like, all right,
Mm-hmm.
cool. So they come and I try to throw it over, but it like bounced in between the lockers and came back on my bed. And I'm like, oh my goodness.
Oh
So
man.
they're
Yeah.
searching. I'm up in the other dorm. My bunkie is stressed out because he, I don't know. I guess he thought that, and it's funny because we're like best friends now. He actually got out, but
Yes, thank God.
he-
That's a
yes,
blessing.
he's like stressed out because he doesn't know if I'm gonna be like, I don't know whose phone that is or whatever, right? But
Mm-hmm.
they go in, they don't find anything, and then next thing you know, like right when they're clearing out this one S&I search and investigation, like the task force for prison, right? He goes running back in and jumps on my bunk, and I'm just like, oh yeah, it's they're gonna call me in a minute. So I just start walking down towards the podium, and like there's this
Mm-hmm.
whole crowd in front of our dorm, and they're like, Guerrero, B2 up, report back to your dorm. So I walk down, and
Yeah.
he's standing there, and he has the phone in his hand. And before he can say anything, he's like, Guerrero, and I'm like, yeah, what are you doing with my phone? He's like, oh, this your phone? And I'm like, yeah. Can you put it back? He's like, oh, you think you're freaking funny? And I'm like, oh, I want my phone back. And he's like, I ain't giving you
Right.
nothing.
Right.
And if you don't tell me where the charger is, and I'm like, oh crap. Because I was able to put the charger back in the hiding spot. And so
Right. Right.
he's like, I want the charger. And I'm like, I don't have one. He's like, yeah, right. It's fully charged. Like you obviously were just on it, right? I'm like, and then he threatens to take like all my bunky stuff, right? So I'm like, damn it. So and I was
Yeah.
mad because I had a hiding spot in a typewriter that they weren't up on. So for me to
Yeah.
show him where it was, everyone else who I told where to hide their stuff, like now their spot's gone.
Yeah.
So I was like,
That's
damn it.
right.
But I had to give it up. And like later on, everyone was like, man, you're a solid dude. You and like no hesitation. I'm like, what am I supposed to do? Like it's mine. Like
Yeah.
I had an arrangement with the white dudes. Unfortunately, it didn't make it to their bunk. So
Yeah,
I
it didn't
gotta I
work
gotta
out.
own
It
that,
didn't work
right?
out. But listen, that just speaks to our character and that we have it. And I liked how when we first started, you're like, just because Tito was in prison doesn't mean it wasn't Tito. Like
Yeah.
everybody will tell you, I was like the people's champ. I would remember everybody's name if I could. I'd smile at everybody. You know what I'm saying? I wouldn't take no gruff off of anyone. But at the same time,
Right.
if I could spread some positivity,
Yep.
I definitely was going to do that. Same thing I do out here, I did in there. It just was so much harder because a lot of the opposition came from, staff or,
Yep.
like every once in a while. Most of the time, though, we want to have family and community, especially
Yes.
when you've been in the same place for so long. You build bonds, you build friendships. And just like we do out here, there's good and there's bad. So now we're out. And then what happens?
Oh well, I got one more story I got to share
Oh,
because
come
I
on,
think
tell us.
I
Yeah.
think and it's where my whole be the change thing comes from, right? So
Okay. Yeah. Oh,
like
tell
I
us.
said,
Wait. Say it. Be the
yeah,
change you want to see.
be the change. So what that is I hashtag be the change on everything I post, and I post every day. But
That's right.
be the change is all about being the person you needed yesterday, today, right? Like if you're complaining
Mm,
about your community looking trashy, don't throw trash on the ground and pick up trash when you see it, right? Like
yep.
just be
Yep.
that person. Stop waiting for someone else to be the person, be the change, right? So
Mm-hmm.
needless to say, I didn't come up with that in prison, but the mindset I did, right? So
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
trying to be the person that I was telling other people to be. And this is kind of a hard story because it was hard doing it in prison, especially everything that happened in the process. So I got phones and stuff, right? And I was letting one of the
Mm-hmm.
Puerto Rican homies like hold the phone and use the phone and blah blah blah, right? Needs to say he's on there,
Mm-hmm.
macking girls and stuff and getting packages and everything, right? And where I'm just
Yeah.
like, I want to keep up with family and blah blah blah, right? Needless to say, he's telling everyone like it's my phone, I'm doing all this stuff, and I'm like, no, dude, you're
Mm.
broke, you're using my phone, but hey, live your dream, right? Like I don't care,
Right. Right.
just don't let it cross over and like it's my phone, it's not yours, right?
Yeah.
So needless to say, like there were a couple of times like these girls would call and I'm on the phone and I'm like, hey, he gets to use the phone from this time to this time.
Right.
And,
Right.
and they're like, well, look, it's his phone, so you need to get off. And I'm like, I'm sorry, sweetheart, it's not. I don't know what he's told you. This is my phone, but he holds it
Yeah.
for me while I'm at work. So he can use it, right? And so, like, this whole thing, like, oh, you're trying to hate on me. And I was like, I could care less what you do, but maybe you should stop lying to people. And then you don't have to
Yeah,
worry about that,
yeah.
right? Like,
Right.
matter of fact, at least tell me about the lies so maybe I can back you up. Like, whatever, right? But it's not that big deal.
Yeah.
Needs to say this dude, and I'm not exaggerating, like he's like a little gorilla, like he's like huge, right?
Yeah.
And he's one of them dudes that we use like, hey, that dude owes money, and he go knock him out real quick, like he was that guy.
Yeah, yeah.
So needless to say, I'm pushing him because he was in and out, right? And I'm like, dude, like, get your stuff together, like, stop. Needless to say, he thinks like I told one of his girls that he had other girls, right? And so he's like,
Oh.
yeah, man, I need to see you up in the dorm. And everything in me, like, and I'm sure you know about this. We gain, especially people that have been in a long time. You have a spider sense, a situational awareness.
Oh
Like,
yeah, you can tell. You can read a room.
it,
You can read a
right?
room.
Like,
Yeah, and it
and
helps out
so,
here too.
oh, 100%. I wish more people
Yes.
had it because I get annoyed at people real quick. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
so in my head, I'm like, he wants to fight.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so everything in me is like, lace up, go up there ready. And I'm like, no. I've been pushing to change. Right. So I went up there in flip
Yeah.
flops, had my little cup of water, like literally everything I shouldn't do. And I
Right,
walk up,
right.
get right up, like, hey, what's up, bro? And he's like, oh man, why you tripping? And blah, 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 and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, you need to let that stuff go. You benefit from me. And then he just like straight off, I call it a sucker punch, but I knew it was coming. But he just bam, and I mean clocks me. Boom.
Wow.
I spill a little bit of my water and I look in the mirror real quick and I'm like, okay, can't see anything. So I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah, I'm keeping your phone. I'm like, go ahead, bro. I'm turning it off tonight. You act like I don't have access to another one. And he's like, oh, yeah,
That's right.
come on. You don't want to fight? And I'm like, no.
That's
I was
right.
like, trust me. I do, but no. And I walk off, right? He actually ended up fracturing my orbital lobe. So
Oh.
the next day I can't really chew or anything, right? And then we go on, I forget what, we were on some kind of lockdown. Something else happened, right? And I'm like, man, I can't chew. And my bunky's like, dude, maybe he broke your jaw. And I'm like, nah, it just hurts on my teeth. Like, and he's like, nah, but like your eyes turning black. Like, you better go tell him so. So I'm like, I fell off my bunk, right? And they're like, right. But then it got so bad, like I couldn't chew. So I'm like, damn.
Oh.
And when I go to the nurse, they had already got like 20 kites, like that there was a fight and all this stuff, right?
Yeah.
So they take me to the nurse and then just take me straight over to AdSeg. And the sergeant, this pissed me off because, mind you, I'm a year to the house at the time. I'm literally like exactly a year to the house. The sergeant's like, we know who did it. Like, he's telling me the guy's name and everything, right? And I'm like, okay, if you know so much, what do we need to talk about?
What do you need me for?
I'm perfectly fine. I've been in the building, and they're like, no, we need you to say it. And I'm like, I don't have anything to say. I fell off my bunk.
Right.
And so they're like, oh yeah, you got a year to the house. You used to be a lifer, didn't you? And I'm like, yeah, I see you read my file. And he's like, well, when I find this weapon in your property, you're going to catch at least another year. And I'm like,
oh, that's terrible.
What? And he's all, yeah. You think I don't have a couple laying around that I could throw in there? And I'm just like, oh my God. Right. And so like, I'm literally like,
shook.
I might not go home. Right. And like, no part of me at any time said, just tell him the name. Like, I was just like, okay. The guard who actually walked me up to the cell, like when we walk out, he was a rookie when like 6 years back. And like, I remember when he started because I was a captain's clerk. Right? So he's walking me. He's like, hey, G, are you okay? And, am I allowed to cuss? I don't want to cuss.
People do it all the time.
No,
go ahead.
No, yeah. But I was like, fuck you, dude. He just threatened me. Aren't you a peace officer? You're supposed to protect. Like, I did nothing wrong. He just threatened to give me more time, lying. And he's like, man, that's a sergeant. And I'm like, don't say another word to me. And he walked me up and I went in there back and forth. I mean, they're calling me out like every week. Well, I ended up going to the hospital. I have a titanium plate in here because they put a plate in here. Yeah, they take me back to the hole. They pull me out every week. You ready to tell? You ready to tell? And I'm like, nope, nope, nope. They're like,
Right,
he's
right.
just sitting there. He's just sitting there, and you're up in here. And I'm like, okay. They're like, you're
Mhm.
gonna parole from here, and I'm like, yeah, I'm good with that. You know, 6 months, and finally, an associate warden comes into ICC Institutional Classification Committee. Associate
Mhm.
warden who was a sergeant when I was a captain's clerk. And he's like, "What's up, man?" And I'm like, "What's up?" He's all, "Come on, Tito, tell us." And his name, his first name was Jim, and I knew it, right? And I was like, "No, Jim, I can't." He's all, "Don't call me by my first name." I was like, "You calling me by my first name?" I was like, "Come on."
Right.
He's like, "All right, man." Uh, Sorry again, but he's like, "All right, motherfucker, I'm gonna send you right back to the same yard, same building.
Dang.
You ready to go see
Okay.
your buddy?" And I was like,
Yeah.
"Yeah." There's, I don't know what you guys are talking about. He's like,
Right,
"All right."
right.
Kicked me out that
So, but
night.
let me put this into
Yes.
context. We're in
Yes, please.
prison. We're in California. And because I won't tell you who's assaulted me, and you already know, you want to go put me on the same housing unit. So if we weren't cool, you basically just set me up to get killed.
Yes,
Go
exactly.
ahead. Yeah,
Exactly, right?
that's how that goes.
So
Look, I
what
just
I
smiled.
did,
That's how that goes.
yeah, no, that is how that
That's how that
goes.
goes.
And
Go
just
fight
for
for your
everyone
life.
watching, anyone who doesn't know the system, whether it's in prison or out, here's the thing. It's a money game. He
Mhm.
standed to get an extra 10 years for that assault. All I
Yeah.
had to do was say his name, and then they got 10 more years of pay because
Yep.
he's going to be housed in prison. They wanted that 10 years.
Mhm.
So apparently they had that conversation with him as well. So when I get out, they actually put me in another building. When Yard gets released, I come out, here he comes, and he's just looking at me, shaking his head. And I'm like, "What's up, man?" And he hugs me and he's like,
Thank
You
you.
you know they kept telling me he's gonna break and we're giving you this 10 years. And I was like, "Yeah, I know." And he's like, "You were in there for 6 months." And I was like, "Yeah, I know. I was there. I also got this plate in my
Yeah.
face. Thank you." And he's like,
Yeah.
"Man, no one is going to do anything to you. I got you until you parole." And I'm like, "Whatever, bro. It's all good, man. You know what?
Mhm.
I was just trying to show you the path I'm on." Right. So he goes, "I got something for you at Unlocked." And I'm thinking he's going to go get me some soups or something stupid. Right.
Right, right. Yeah.
I get choked up when I tell this part of the story. So Unlock comes, he goes in, comes back out, and he has a manila envelope, right? And I'm like, "What's this?" And he's like, "I can't make it right, but hopefully this makes it better." I'm like, I open it up. He got his GED while I was in there. And I
Oh
was just
man.
like, I was like, "You know what?"
Oh.
I go, "You know what? It was worth it then." And he's like,
Oh.
"Nah." And I'm like, "No, it was." You know what? Because if I found this out and I told, I would have been pissed. So at least now you're going home with something, a better chance, right? So yeah,
Right.
and needless to say, that fool stuck to my hip until the day I paroled. Like he was like, "Anyone
Oh,
come up, I'm handling it." Like and
that is a
and
oh my
yeah,
gosh.
so
That's awesome.
but that's why when I tell people be the change, I'm like, it ain't always easy, but
No,
it's
not
always
at
worth
all.
it. It's always worth it. You know, you might
That's
not
right.
realize it till way later, but like be that voice, be that change. Anyway,
Oh,
yeah,
Tito.
I
Tito. Oh my gosh. We went from cell phones to next level. And we went, listen, I have just been like going down memory lane with you. Because listen, clearly I know how that goes, but what an awesome example you set by just being the person that, out here people come up against adversity and they come up against triumph and it instantly they cave.
yeah,
They cave,
yeah,
and they don't. It's like, oh, one defeat, and you don't know there's people walking around. Look at this man. You wouldn't think that he spent a year basically in solitary confinement.
yeah.
When people pass by me, they have no idea, and you just can't cave. You have to hold on. You have to be the person you want to see in the next man. Tito, we've been on here for a minute. I'm gonna have you come back and talk to us some more, but leave us with something and tell us how we can get a hold of you, all the good things.
Yeah, definitely on LinkedIn, Tito Guerrero. I have a podcast that I haven't. I actually recorded another episode, but I haven't published it. But 15 to Life podcast. It's on Apple and
Wow,
everywhere else. There's a ton of old content that you can go and listen to.
great.
LinkedIn, Facebook. There's a 15 to Life page. Instagram, 15 to Life. TikTok, 15 to Life. Um, and really, it's about life after having life in prison, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there it is, 15 to Life. That's my my
15 to
podcast and
Life, and that'll
everything.
be the book. We're going to be
Yeah.
eagerly anticipating the book.
Yes, I started writing a book and I stopped, and I need to get back into it. The other thing is, much like you know, I do motivational speaking, and I love getting
Yeah.
out. I love getting into institutions. So especially if you're in
Yes.
Illinois and you know you want someone to come in and run a program or just talk to the individuals. I used to go into San Quentin all the time and
Yeah.
talk, and that is very surreal walking back into a prison where
Mhm.
you were at and people like running up to you to hug you, and you're like, I'm free and they're not. And here we
Yeah.
are, like,
Yeah.
it's crazy. But yeah, no, and just imparting once again, like I can't say it enough. You know, be a voice for those who haven't found their voice yet. Be the change. Never in the fight. There's so many people that you said it earlier, like that are doing worse. And
Yes.
we tend to sink into our own pit and not even realize there's so many people that wish they could be in our pit, right? So
Mhm.
I thank you for what you do. Love your TED talk, love everything you put out. So yes, I will
Tito.
come back anytime you want.
Well, absolutely, absolutely, because we have more to unpack. And don't you all love out here how it started with the cell phone, the contraband cell phone, and we just worked our way through this cell phone up into this young man having a life-changing
Very
event
real.
yes, a life-changing event that, hey, somebody was willing to go to bat for me, even though I did them wrong. Those are the kind of, and people out here, they're like, those are the type of things that prisoners do. Like sometimes I have been wronged out here and I am quick to make amends. You know why? Because I don't want to take that same mentality that someone showed towards me when they threw me away and
Yep.
warehoused me and forgot about me. I don't forget about anyone else. So we want to be the champion for those without voices. Tito,
Yes.
thank you. And I can't wait to have you back. Okay.
Yes. Thank you as well.